Magento is a very popular e-commerce system, but sometimes it can be overwhelming and you may find it difficult. My name is Peter Britka and I am a professional Magento developer with 9 years of experience. Work with me and I'll do my best to explain you Magento 2 the easy way. I do personal coaching in Magento 2 and I also create online tutorials. If this is something that interests you, please visit my website at www.peterbritka.com and sign up for the option that works the best for you. This is the third video in the series where we are adding a new total in the system. In the first two videos, we registered a new grand total rounding in the system using sales.xml. We wrote a collector class that is responsible for the calculations, and we displayed the total in the front end as a fixed value. In this video, we will continue with this module. We'll add new columns in the database that we'll later use for saving the totals, and we'll also change the collector model and display the correct amounts in front end. So first, let's start with adding the columns in system. We can either use install data script if you want to add the columns right when the module is first enabled in the system, or we can use upgrade data script that adds the columns once the module is enabled already. The difference is that if you create the install data script and your module is already enabled, you have to go to your database to set up module table and remove this record, and then you can run bin Magento setup upgrade command line tool to have the system execute this install data script. I'm not gonna do it in this video. Instead, I'm going to write upgrade data script because the module is already enabled in the system. So create a new folder, setup, create a new PHP file, upgrade data, define the namespace, name the class, it will implement upgrade data interface. We have to define it in the use section of this class. It has one public method, upgrade. We should also add these two classes in the use section. Everything which is inside this upgrade method and which is between the commands setup, start setup, and setup and setup gets executed. So here we should write the code that adds the new columns. And remember that this upgrade method is called every time you run bin Magento setup upgrade command. So you need to make sure that it is run only for the appropriate version number. Here we need to add a condition. If version compare context get version, which returns the current version of this module, which is defined in etc module.xml. So we can actually go and look at it. Current version is 0.10 and we'll change it to 0.11. So if this version is less than 0.11, everything which is inside this condition gets executed. We are going to add columns in quote, quote address, and sales order tables. And for this, we will also need to define two more classes in the use section. One will be Magento quote setup quote setup factory, and the other one will be Magento sales setup factory. Later we will look inside these classes to see which methods we actually need, but for now let's add two private properties. One is quote setup factory and the other one is sales setup factory. Let's inject these classes inside our setup upgrade data script. So let's define public function construct and inject quote setup factory and sales setup factory, and assign these arguments to the properties. And let's take a look inside these two classes. So go to vendor, Magento, module quote, setup, quote setup. The important method is add attribute, and also in module sales, setup, sales setup, add attribute, because it checks if the table where we are adding the column is one of flat entity tables, which are these tables like sales order, sales invoice, etc. And this method is also responsible for adding the columns in grid tables if the attributes are defined to go into those tables. Sales order and sales invoice are examples of grid tables, and the columns from these tables are used in admin grids. In this upgrade method, we could simply use the general functions for creating columns in the database, but in this case, when we are adding the quote and sales tables, it is better if we use quote setup and sales setup classes, because they handle also the grid tables, and if the core Magento developers decide to add some special functionality in the future, our code shouldn't have any problems to be executed correctly. So first we need to create instances of these classes. One will be quote installer that we'll create by calling this quote setup factory, create, and as argument we'll use an array with the key setup and the value setup, which comes from the argument of this upgrade method. And the same we will do for the sales installer. So we'll call this sales setup factory, create, and also define the setup with the value of the setup argument. The quote installer will be responsible for creating columns in quote tables, and sales installer will be responsible for creating the columns in the order table. So the quote tables where we want to create the columns are quote and quote address. We will iterate over these quote tables. And we'll call quote installer at attribute, which is the method in the quote setup class. So this one. The first argument is entity type ID, which is this quote and quote address. So it's the value of the table variable. Then there comes the code of the new column, which in this case is grand total rounding. And then we have the array of the definition of the column, which can have multiple arguments. One of them is type, that will be decimal. Then comment is also important, otherwise Magento would throw an exception. So I will add a comment grand total rounding. Required attribute, I'll set it to false, which means the field can be null. And another key is after, which defines the column in the table, after which we'll add this new column. I want to add this grand total rounding after the field grand total. Let's do the same for base grand total rounding. So I can copy all this definition and change only the code of the field to base grand total rounding. Also comment can be changed, and after. And this is all that needs to be done for the quote tables. Let's define the sales tables. This time it will be only order, which comes from here, from these protected flat entity tables, and it will add the columns inside sales order table. So we can copy this code and change this variable to sales tables, because this time we want to iterate over the sales tables. Also, we need to change this quote installer to sales installer, because this time we are dealing with the sales tables. Save the file. Then let's open module.xml and change the version number to 011. Clear the config cache. Run bin Magento setup upgrade command. This will go over the upgrade schema and upgrade data setup scripts and execute the code which is inside, so it will add new columns in our database. Now go into the database and check if the fields are there. First, let's refresh the setup module table and notice that the version numbers for Pibridka grand total rounding have changed. Then go to sales order table, click on structure, and let's find grand total rounding, which is here, and also base grand total rounding. And let's check two more tables: quote address, grand total rounding here, base grand total rounding here, and quote table. Here is base grand total rounding and also grand total rounding. So all the fields are in the database, and later we will use them. Now let's change the calculation model so that instead of the fixed value of 0.5, we will have the correct amount here, and also the order total will be updated. Close these files and open our collector class, rounding.php. We can comment out these two fixed fields. And in the beginning, we should reset the total amount. So write total, set total amount, this get code, set it to 0, and let's do the same for the base grand total amount. set it again to 0. Define the variable grand total, which we'll get by calling total get grand total, and calculate round total, which we'll get by calling round function and as an argument grand total. This will round the grand total to the nearest integer value, either up or down. Then we'll compare the difference of these two variables. So let's write if absolute value of round total minus grand total is less than 0.001. The reason why we are comparing these two values to 0.001 is because we are dealing with the float numbers and they are calculated on two decimal places. So if the difference is on the third decimal place, these two variables can be considered different. And only in this case we'll set the total amount. So we can copy all these lines inside this condition. First of all, let's also define base round total variable, which we'll get by calling round total get base grand total, and calculate grand total rounding, which is gonna be the value of this new total, by calling round total, which is the rounded value, minus grand total. So it can be either negative or positive number. And do the same for base grand total rounding, which we'll get by base round total minus total get base grand total. So for example, if the grand total is 26.4, the nearest integer value is 26, and 26 minus 26.4 is negative 0.4. Then we'll change this method code to add total amount, and also this add base total amount, because that's how it should be called. These two lines stay the same because we are setting the grand total rounding and base grand total rounding. And we also need to set the grand total on the total model. So set grand total, and we will be adding to the current grand total and we will add the new grand total rounding. Do the same for the base grand total. So set base grand total. Again, we need to get the current total, or current base grand total, and add base grand total rounding. So the new grand total will be rounded to the nearest integer value, and grand total rounding and base grand total rounding will be added to the total model. That's pretty much it. All we need to do now is replace this fixed value in the fetch method with total get grand total rounding. I found one error. This condition should have different operator, because the rounding is happening only if the difference is more than 0.001. That's when these two variables are different. So save the file, update the shopping cart so the calculations are updated. And now all the amounts are correct. Rounding is minus 0.4 and the new order total is 26. So this was it for this video. We added new columns in quote and order tables, and we also changed the calculations so that the correct amounts are displayed. In the next video in this series, we will save this new amount in the database and finish the order. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. Also, subscribe to my channel so that you are notified whenever I release a new Magento 2 tutorial. I am also available for personal coaching, so if you're interested and want to have someone to explain you Magento 2, please go to my website at peterbritka.com and sign up for the personal coaching. You can also sign up for my online course where you will build the spam protection module and learn the most common tasks in Magento 2. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.